Hello dolls and welcome back to another video. Today I want to share a really special story with you. A story of courage and boundary breaking women. Today I want to put the spotlight on the incredibly beautiful supermodels of the 1960s and 70s. I have been wanting to make this video for quite a while now, but February is Black History Month, so I felt like this was very fitting because I feel like when we talk about the 60s and the models of the 60s, you usually always think about Twiggy, Patty Boyd, Chrissy Shrimpton, all these beautiful but white women. And today I want to take some time to share the spotlight on the black models of the 60s and 70s. They were the first of their time, the first black models to find commercial success, and their stories are truly inspiring. So today I want to share the incredible stories of the black models of the 1960s and 70s. In the glow of a camera flash, a statue-like beauty stands frozen in time, draped in flowing silk, her high cheekbones accentuated by the perfect play of light and shadow. She is Donyale Luna, and in 1966 she became the first black woman to grace the cover of British Vogue, a moment that should have been a triumph but was instead a whispered controversy. It was the 1960s, a time of revolution, of shifting ideals, of resistance and change. But fashion, exclusive, European dominated, resistant to anything outside its rigid standards, was slow to embrace the transformation happening in the streets. These women were not just mannequins draped in designer fabrics. They were pioneers, forcing the industry to confront its biases and expand its vision of beauty. Their presence challenged a deeply ingrained belief that high fashion belonged to one race, one skin tone, one type of woman. Donyale was the first, but she would not be the last. Soon, Naomi Sims would carve out her own space in the modeling world, while Pat Cleveland would find her artistic freedom on the runways of Paris. By the mid-1970s, Beverly Johnson would make history as the first black woman on the cover of American Vogue, and Iman would redefine the global standard of beauty. Their success was not merely personal, it was a step toward a broader cultural reckoning, one that would eventually make diversity in fashion not just a possibility, but a necessity. Before Donyale's cover, black women were mostly invisible in the world of high fashion. Their presence was confined to the ebony magazines like Ebony Fashion Fair or advertisements that targeted black audiences. The mainstream fashion industry, dictated by Eurocentric ideas, was hesitant, if not outright unwilling, to acknowledge black beauty. When Donyale's image appeared on British Vogue, her features were praised, yet often in a way that distanced her from her blackness. In America, Vogue wouldn't feature a black woman on its cover until 8 years later, when in 1974 Beverly Johnson became the first black woman on the cover of the American Vogue. The world of modeling in the early 1960s was defined by white, slender, and polished icons. Jean Shrimpton, Twiggy, and Verushka reigned supreme. For black women, opportunities in high fashion were scarce. Runway shows, magazine covers, and lucrative contracts were overwhelmingly reserved for white models, and black women who dreamed of making it in the industry often found themselves relegated to the sidelines. Yet the civil rights movement and the rise of black consciousness were reshaping culture. The Black is Beautiful movement, with its rallying cry for self-love and pride in African heritage, created a hunger for diverse representation. Slowly, the doors of fashion, held shut for so long, began to crack open, and the first wave of black supermodels emerged, challenging old notions of beauty and changing the industry forever. If you've never heard of Donyale Luna, you're in for a real treat today. I briefly talked about her in my video all about 1960s supermodels, but today I would like to take a deeper look into her life and career. This woman was a trailblazer, a force in the modeling industry, and an icon for the black community, though she never quite embraced that last part. The contradictions in her life, her resistance to racial identity, and the complexities of her career make her one of the most fascinating and often overlooked figures in fashion history. Though she was the first black supermodel, her legacy has been overshadowed largely because she actively distanced herself from the very identity that many wanted her to represent. Understanding Donyale means delving into her psychology, the racial tensions of the era, and the personal struggles that shaped her path. Donyale Luna was born as Peggy Ann Freeman in Detroit, Detroit, Michigan in 1945 to working-class parents Nathaniel and Peggy Freeman. Her childhood was turbulent. Her father, an alcoholic, had a volatile relationship with her mother, and the couple married and divorced multiple times. Donyale, one of 3 sisters, grew up in a financially stable yet emotionally fraught home. From an early age, Donyale was unlike everybody else. She was tall. By 16, she stood an astonishing 6'3" and possessed striking, almost otherworldly features. Her classmates recalled her as friendly but distant, often lost in her own world. She began crafting an identity that transcended her reality, adopting the name Donyale George Luna and speaking in an affected European accent. Even her own family noted that she was detached from them, wrapped up in a dreamlike existence of her own making. Donyale's life changed dramatically when she was discovered on the streets of Detroit by British photographer David McCabe. Enchanted by her extraordinary looks, McCabe encouraged her to move to New York to pursue modeling. Initially, her mother resisted, hoping Donyale would become a nurse, but she was determined. Eventually, her mother relented, and Donyale moved to New York, first living with her aunt in New Jersey before finding a place of her own. By 1964, she had secured a contract with Harper's Bazaar, and in 1965, she made history by appearing on the magazine's cover, albeit in an illustration form rather than a photograph. Still, this was a groundbreaking moment. Donyale was the first black model to be featured on Harper's Bazaar cover in its 98-year history. However, the backlash was swift. Southern advertisers and subscribers protested, leading to a loss in revenue for the magazine. Fashion designers like Norman Norell outrightly refused to dress her. The prejudice in the American fashion industry that Donyale faced was overwhelming. Frustrated by the barriers she faced in the US, Donyale followed the footsteps of Josephine Baker and other black artists before her. She moved to Europe. There she found acceptance that eluded her in America. Paris, London, and Rome embraced her alien-like beauty. She became a muse for Salvador Dali and worked with legendary photographers such as Richard Avedon and David Bailey. Her biggest breakthrough came in March of 1966 when she became the first black model to appear on the cover of British Vogue. This was a monumental achievement, paving the way for the future black models like Beverly Johnson and Iman. But despite her success, Donyale's relationship with race remained complicated. She often denied being black, claiming instead to be of various mixed ethnicity, Polynesian, Mexican, and even from the moon itself. She invented elaborate backstories, telling interviewers she had 3 brothers in a band, that she ate 3 kilos of meat a day, and that she came from Boston. None of it was true, but the media accepted these stories without a question. Her refusal to acknowledge her black identity alienated her from the black community. At a time when the civil rights movement was at its peak, when figures like Malcolm X were urging black people to embrace their heritage, Donyale was doing the opposite. She wanted to exist beyond race, to be seen as a fantastical being rather than a black woman. This rejection of identity was deeply controversial and contributed to her erasure from the broader narrative of black fashion history. But while it's easy to condemn Donyale for her choices, it's also important to understand them. The fashion industry in the 1960s was brutally racist. Donyale faced rejection, discrimination, and even financial losses simply because of her skin color. Advertisers refused to work with magazines that featured her. Journalists spat in the face of designer Paco Rabanne for using black models. The constant battle to be accepted in a world that despised her must have been exhausting. Donyale's solution was to create an identity free from the constraints of race, one where she could exist as an ethereal, untouchable being. I almost felt like she just wanted to be a model, but in a time where her skin color was so revolutionary, people expected her to be an activist. They so desperately wanted her to stand up and be proud of being black, and Donyale didn't want to be part of that movement. While I understand how painful this must have been for many people in the black community, I honestly don't think she should solely be blamed for that. She acted out of internalized racism that had been brought onto her day in and day out. While she was the first black top model, it seemed like she'd much rather be any other model. Someone who could just exist in the job without being an activist. Despite her success in Europe, Donyale's career began to decline in the late 1960s and early 70s. She transitioned into acting, appearing in Andy Warhol's Screen Tests and Federico Fellini's Satyricon, but struggled to maintain steady work. The media, once enchanted by her mysterious mystique turned against her. Rumors of drug use and erratic behavior began to overshadow her talent. By the mid-1970s, the fashion world had moved on. In her final years, Donyale lived in Italy, where she married Italian photographer Luigi Cazzaniga. They had a daughter, Dream, named in honor of Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. But Donyale's struggles with addiction took their toll. On May 17, 1979, she died of a heroin overdose at just 33 years old. For me, this feels like she eventually came back to her Black roots. Maybe while she was a model, she felt too caught up in everything to be an activist. And now that she had left the fashion industry and gained some distance, she felt more connected to her roots. We can only speculate, but judging on her daughter's name and the reasoning she gave behind it, for me it feels like she finally had made peace with who she was. Despite being a pioneer, Donyale is often left out of the conversation of the first Black supermodels. Beverly Johnson, who became the first Black model to appear on the cover of American Vogue in 1974, is often given that title instead. The primary reason? Donyale's refusal to embrace her Blackness. During her lifetime, many Black people felt insulted by her rejection of her heritage. She was viewed as someone who did not want to be part of the struggles for racial equality. While today she is celebrated by some, Zendaya famously paid tribute to her in the Essence magazine. Her legacy remains complicated. Yet Donyale's influence cannot be denied. She opened doors for Black models in high fashion, even if she herself struggled to walk through them. Her story is a reminder of the harsh realities of race and beauty in the fashion industry. She was ahead of her time, misunderstood and deeply flawed, but above all, she was unforgettable. Donyale Luna wanted to be more than a Black model. She wanted to be a star, a legend, a dream. And in many ways, she succeeded. She just didn't live to see the world finally recognize it. There is actually a documentary on Donyale Luna. I think it is on HBO and Amazon Prime. I have tried to get my hands on that for the last month or so, because it is not available in Germany, and so I need to find a way to actually watch that, because you also cannot get a physical copy. Because if I can find out more about her, I would love to write a podcast episode about her one day. As said, Donyale may be the first Black supermodel, but she certainly wasn't the last. Naomi Sims wasn't just a model, she was a trailblazer who fundamentally changed the landscape of fashion and beauty for Black women. While Donyale Luna embodied an ethereal, otherworldly presence, Naomi was pragmatic, strategic, and deeply aware of the industry's racial barriers. Instead of waiting for opportunities, she created them. But just like Donyale, Naomi faced relentless rejection from agencies that claimed she was too dark for mainstream fashion. Undeterred, she devised her own path. She reached out directly to photographers, including the New York Times' Gustav Peterson, whose striking 1967 images landed her on the cover of the New York Times magazine. This was a major turning point, making her the first Black model to appear on the cover of a mainstream fashion publication in the US. But Naomi didn't stop there. The next year, she secured the cover of Ladies' Home Journal in November of 1968, making her the first Black model on the cover of a widely circulated women's magazine in the US. She was also one of the first Black models to appear in national advertisements, including a breakthrough AT&T campaign. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Naomi was in demand, walking for Halston and gracing the pages of Vogue and Harper's Bazaar. Unlike Donyale, who found more success in Europe, Naomi was embraced by American designers who admired her elegant and poised look. She also became one of the first Black models to secure lucrative beauty contracts, paving the way for models like Iman and Beverly Johnson. Naomi recognized that modeling had an expiration date, and she planned ahead for the future. She left the runaways in the mid-1970s and built a beauty empire tailored specifically for Black women. Her line of wigs, launched in 1973, became a multi-million-dollar business, catering to an underserved market. She later expanded into cosmetics and skincare, publishing books on Black beauty and self-care. Naomi Sims' influence extended beyond fashion. She changed how Black beauty was marketed and perceived. She was proof that Black women didn't have to conform to Eurocentric standards to succeed. They could create their own lane. Unlike Donyale, who struggled with her racial identity, Naomi embraced it and used it to forge a path for herself and others. Her legacy can be seen in the careers of later models like Iman, Beverly Johnson, and Tyra Banks, who followed her example in both modeling and entrepreneurship. She wasn't just a face in fashion history, she was an architect of change. Moving on with the beautiful Alva Chin. Alva Chin was a trailblazer in the fashion world, breaking barriers for Black women in a way that combined elegance, resilience, and grace. While Naomi Sims and Donyale Luna were key figures in shifting the industry's view of Black beauty, Alva carved out her own unique space, not just as a model, but as a symbol of perseverance in an industry that was slow to embrace diversity. Like her contemporaries, Alva faced significant challenges. Early in her career, she encountered rejection and discrimination, as many agencies believed she didn't fit the Eurocentric standards of beauty dominating fashion at the time. But Alva, who was born in New York, didn't let these setbacks define her. She took matters into her own hands, working tirelessly to make her mark and redefine what it meant to be a Black model in a predominantly white industry. Her breakthrough came in the late 1960s, when Alva's striking figure and poised, sophisticated presence caught the attention of top designers and photographers. She became one of the first Black models to walk the runway for major designers like Halston, Yves Saint Laurent, and Bill Blass, all while maintaining an elegance that resonated in both American and European fashion houses. But Alva's impact went far beyond the catwalk. She became a frequent presence in the pages of Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and Essence, making history as one of the first Black models to be featured prominently in these publications. Alva also made a name for herself in high-profile campaigns, appearing in ads for prestigious brands like Revlon and Clairol, which were groundbreaking in showcasing Black beauty on a global scale. Through it all, Alva maintained a quiet dignity, refusing to be pushed into a mold dictated by the mainstream. She was unapologetically herself, unafraid to challenge conventions and shatter expectations, and in doing so, she opened the door for future generations of Black models who would follow into her footsteps. Though she retired from the runway in the early 1980s, Alva's influence continued to resonate. She remained involved in the fashion world as a consultant, guiding young models and supporting diversity initiatives. Alva's legacy is a reminder that true beauty transcends color and shape, and that the path to success is often paved by those brave enough to defy the norm. Alva Chin's story is one of quiet revolution. She didn't need loud proclamations of fame to make her mark. Her work, her elegance, and her strength spoke for itself. And through her groundbreaking career, she helped to lay the foundation for a future where Black models were not just seen, but celebrated. If there was a single moment that shattered fashion's racial glass ceiling, it was Beverly Johnson's 1974 Vogue cover. As the first Black woman to grace the cover of the American edition, her presence sent shock waves through the industry. It was more than just a milestone. It was a declaration that Black beauty belonged in high fashion. Born in Buffalo, New York in 1952, Beverly initially set her sights on a law career, but her natural poise and striking features led her into modeling. Her Vogue cover wasn't a one-time victory. It signaled a shift, however gradual, toward a more inclusive industry. In the years that followed, she became one of the most in-demand models of the decade, breaking barriers on the runway and in campaigns. But her ambitions extended beyond fashion. She ventured into acting, appeared in film and television, and later launched her own beauty empire. By the mid-1970s, the fashion industry was changing, yet progress remained uneven. Donyale's Vogue moment was historic, but it didn't open the floodgates. Black models still struggled to land major campaigns, often chosen only when designers sought to make a statement. Yet despite the industry reluctance to embrace diversity, the presence of Black models like Beverly Johnson signaled that change was inevitable. Beverly's legacy is more than just the cover. It's a testament to perseverance and the power of breaking barriers. She may have been the first, but she ensured she would not be the last. Next up, let's talk about the stunning Pat Cleveland. Pat Cleveland wasn't just a model, she was a force of nature. Her ability to turn a simple runway into a spectacle made her unforgettable. Unlike the traditional post models of the early 1960s, Pat treated the catwalk like a stage, gliding, twirling, and dancing in a way that felt both effortless and revolutionary. Born in 1950 in New York City, Pat was of mixed-race heritage, African-American, Cherokee, and Swedish, giving her an exoticized appeal in an industry that often only made space for black models when they could be deemed different enough. But despite her striking looks and undeniable talent, she quickly realized that opportunities for black models in America were few and far between. Her first break came in the late 1960s, when Vogue editor Carrie Donovan noticed her and pushed her into the fashion spotlight. Yet, despite being featured in major fashion spreads, she was often sidelined when it came to securing the most prestigious campaigns and covers. Frustrated with the racism in the American fashion world, Pat made a bold move. She left. Paris, the heart of high fashion, welcomed her with open arms. Designers like Yves Saint Laurent, Karl Lagerfeld, and Thierry Mugler recognized her talent and gave her the opportunities she had struggled to find in the US. She became a muse, a favorite on the runways, and an undeniable presence in the fashion scene of the early 1970s. She wasn't just another model, she was an artist in motion. Her moment of true international stardom came in 1973, during the Battle of Versailles, a legendary fashion event that pitted 5 American designers, Oscar de la Renta, Bill Blass, Anne Klein, Halston, and Stephen Burrows, against 5 of France's most revered couturiers, Yves Saint Laurent, Christian Dior, Hubert de Givenchy, Pierre Cardin, and Emmanuel Ungaro. The Americans brought something unexpected, a diverse cast of mostly black models, including Pat, who captivated the audience with their dynamic, high-energy walks. I've read loads and loads about the Battle of Versailles, and if that seems interesting to you because it is this truly fascinating story, let me know and I can make a video all about that. The American team, previously underestimated, stunned the crowd, proving that black models belonged on the world stage, not as a token, but as stars. Pat, with her signature flamboyance and expressive movement, was one of the night's biggest standouts. It was a moment that shifted the perception of American fashion and reinforced the growing power of black models. Even after the Battle of Versailles, Pat continued to thrive in Europe. Her return to the US years later saw a more inclusive, albeit still flawed industry. Yet by then, she had already cemented her legacy as one of the most influential black models of her generation. Her impact wasn't just about breaking barriers. It was about reshaping the very nature of what it meant to be a model, turning the runway into a space of performance, personality, and power. Then came Iman, a Somali-born beauty with an otherworldly presence. When she debuted in 1975, the industry treated her as an exotic discovery rather than an acknowledgement of African beauty that had always existed. David Bowie would later call her, quote, the most beautiful woman in the world. But before she became a global icon, she had to prove her worth in a fashion world still reluctant to fully embrace diversity. Discovered by photographer Peter Bird while studying political science at the University of Nairobi, Iman was introduced to the fashion world as an exotic, almost mythical figure. Designers and editors marveled at her regal bone structure, elegant neck, and poised demeanor, but her presence was often framed as an anomaly rather than a long overdue recognition of African beauty. Despite being fluent in 5 languages and possessing a sharp business acumen, she was frequently portrayed as an untamed discovery rather than a skilled professional entering the industry on her own terms. Iman's impact, however, was undeniable. Yves Saint Laurent quickly became one of her most vocal supporters, famously dedicating an entire collection to her, his 1976 African Queen line, in which he paid homage to her striking features and magnetic presence. As her career soared, she became one of the most sought-after models of the late 1970s and 1980s, working with designers like Halston, Valentino, and Calvin Klein. Beyond fashion, she expanded her influence into the beauty industry, launching Iman Cosmetics in 1984. In 1995, a line specifically catered to women of color, during a time when shade inclusivity was still an afterthought in mainstream beauty brands. Despite these victories, the road to lasting change was long. Iman had to navigate an industry that still viewed her as an exception rather than a part of the norm. Yet her presence forced the conversation forward, paving the way for the next generation of black models. Women like Naomi Campbell, Tyra Banks, and Beverly Peele, who would continue to push the boundaries in the decades to come. Their stories are a testament to the resilience and brilliance of black women in fashion. They were more than just muses. They were architects of change, proving that beauty was not confined to a single standard, but as vast and varied as the world itself. But their battles weren't fought in vain. Every time a black model graced the cover, strutted down a catwalk, or landed a major contract, it wasn't just a personal victory. It was a shift in cultural consciousness, a moment of visibility for every young black girl who had spent her life searching for a reflection of herself in the glossy pages of a magazine. These women didn't just challenge an industry, they defined a deeply ingrained system that had long upheld a narrow, exclusionary definition of beauty. They faced rejection, tokenization, and skepticism in every turn, yet they persevered, not just for themselves, but for the generation that would follow. Naomi Sims built an empire so that black women could see themselves represented beyond fleeting trends. Beverly Johnson shattered an unspoken rule of exclusion by claiming her place on the Vogue cover, proving that black beauty belonged in high fashion. Pat Cleveland took her artistry to Paris, where she flourished in a way American designers had been reluctant to embrace. Donyale Luna's influence was undeniable, setting the stage for the generations of black models who would follow her. And Iman, with her regal presence and striking features, redefined how the world viewed African beauty. Each of these women carried the weight of an industry that had never made space for them willingly, and yet they carved out their own paths. With every runway they commanded, every editorial they transformed, they forced the world to confront a truth it had long resisted. Black beauty was not a trend, not an anomaly, but an undeniable force. They inspired a new wave of models in the 1980s and beyond. Women like Veronica Webb, Tyra Banks, Naomi Campbell, and Alec Webb, who took the fight even further, shattering barriers in advertisement, beauty, and global fashion markets. Their influence extended beyond the runway and into the business world, where black beauty entrepreneurs built on their legacy, ensuring that black women no longer had to depend on industries that once ignored them. And though fashion still has strides to make in terms of true representation and equality, the groundwork laid by these pioneering women ensures that the world can never again pretend black beauty does not belong. Today, their legacy lives on in the faces of modern supermodels, in the increasing diversity of magazine covers and runways, and in the countless young black women who now grow up knowing that their beauty is not an exception. It is the standard, just as it always should have been. Their revolution was not just about fashion. It was about visibility, power, and the right to be seen. So that is it for today's video. That is it for my take on black 1960s and 70s supermodels. I really hope you enjoyed it. During this month, I want to shine the light on the black artists of the 1960s and 70s, and I'm so truly excited to be able to tell their stories. It is so truly heartbreaking for me to see what these women went through, and I feel like whenever I read about black women in the 1960s, whether it's these models or someone like Marsha Hunt, for example, they faced these huge repercussions and this kind of like idea that they're not supposed to be there in the spotlight and that they're not supposed to be themselves. And it just breaks my heart knowing that these women had to go against so much to get to a point where it didn't take a white woman like Twiggy, not even remotely as much, to get there. I'm so impressed by their willingness to fight this. I feel like it is so important, and I read a lot of articles about Donyale Luna and how people were so disappointed about her not being outright and really open and being a part of the activism of the time. I can only speak from my perspective and from everything that I read, but I just feel like not everyone has to be an activist. Not everyone has to be super outright and outspoken about something. And I feel like Donyale was put into the position where she had to be, and people were disappointed that she wasn't. Whereas if you look at a model like Jean Shrimpton, for example, she was never put in any situation like that. She was just a beautiful model and that was it. And I feel like that is all Donyale Luna ever wanted to be. And she was so truly beautiful, and my heart breaks for her not being acknowledged during the time that she was alive. But yeah, that brings today's video to an end. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know all of your thoughts and feelings in the comments. I would love to know what you think about these women. And yeah, get excited for the rest of this month because I'm working on some truly exciting and interesting videos for Black History Month. I hope you have a beautiful day. Go out, enjoy the sunshine, take yourself some time to focus on you and your mental health today, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye, dolls!